I'm honored to be here. It's always great being in other territories. I am Ganyangahaga, Mohawk of the Haudenosaunee. My home community is the Six Nations of the Grand River. It's an honor to be here, as I said, and a real privilege. I want to thank the peoples, their elders, their ancestors, and all those who will come. So why am I here? Because Stephen invited me, of course. I never miss an opportunity to come to the summer intensive. As he said, I was part of the founding of this, the development of it, so it's always a pleasure to be here. So I thought today I'd talk about a few things that are happening at the Canada Council for the Arts, because that's where I work now. I'm the director of the Indigenous programs there, collectively known as Creating, Knowing, and Sharing the Arts and Cultures of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We're very excited about it, and I'll get to that. Stephen also, as he mentioned, we lost a dear friend earlier this year, James Luna. So he asked if I might say a few words about James. And that's a daunting task. James Luna is an iconic presence. How do you talk about somebody who's had such a profound impact on art, culture, the way we think about society? Well, start by talking about him as a friend. There's not a person I know who's met him who hasn't been deeply touched by that. I have known James, he's still with us, he's here, for almost 20 years. We weren't close. We didn't call each other, hang out a lot, but our paths crossed a lot. So I have some really intense memories of James. Sitting talking about art for hours. Sitting drinking for hours. Sometimes mixing the two together, which was probably the best. But they're my memories. I'm going to hold on to them. So I could talk about his art. Iconic pieces like the artifact piece. Take a picture with a real Indian. Ishi, the archive project. Amandati, which is what he presented at the Venice Biennale in 2005. But there's been so much written about James, and I encourage you to read some fabulous essays in the book that was created from the Venice Biennale performances. Smart people than me have spoken and articulated his presence, his power. I could also talk about him as an inspiration, a role model, and a mentor to a generation of artists, people like Rebecca Belmore, Lord Blondeau, Ahasu, Muskego Esqueo, many, many more. He gave of himself so freely, so generously. He was an inspiration to a generation of thinkers, people like Leanne Martin, Richard Hill, myself, Rice, and many others. He made us rethink how we place, we formulate, and we claim Indigenous space through art, through culture, through presence. James, in the most beautiful way, in the most loving way, proclaimed his space. And he taught us to do that. But one of the most, I think, significant parts of his practice was giving voice to others. Some, many long departed. Datio and Ishi come to mind right away. He used himself, his voice, his body, to give them voice, to give us all voice. So I thought the best way to honor him today would be to do that for him. I could talk a lot about James Luna, talk about his art, but that would be my voice. I want his voice to be here. So, I'm going to read from an interview that he gave a little while after he did the Venice show. Now, if I was a performance artist like James Luna, I would do this in a way that would take you to new spaces, to put his voice in your head. I don't have that talent, not one that I was gifted with, so I'll just read it. If I was really going to honor him, I'd take my shirt off. Those of you know James. But I think I will save you that particular agony, and I'll just read it. And then I'm going to show you a short compilation video of some of the works he's done. It won't give you the idea. It will not bring you to the place that you were at if you saw James Luna. It'll give you a little idea. And I just love seeing him again, seeing what he did so well. And then after that, I'll talk about the Canada Council for the Arts. If you're still into it, if I still have any time left. So this is from an interview with James Luna. I'll play both parts. You've been called one of the most dangerous Indians alive. What are you trying to say? Well, James says, at times the message can be potent. One of my subjects is with ethnic identity, how people perceive us and how we perceive ourselves. Not everybody can talk about that, so I guess that's what makes me a dangerous character. Why do you make yourself the subject of your art? Because I know myself better than I know anything else. How do you talk about things like intercultural identity? Do you talk about it in the third person? No. If you sacrifice yourself, so to speak, then it becomes much more dynamic. I like to think that in my work I'm talking about something I know because I've lived it, as opposed to something that I read about. I was looking at work that I hadn't been involved with. There was a gap there that I filled rather quickly when I looked around at myself, my family, my tribe, my community, and my reservation. It was all there. I didn't have to go anywhere for the subject matter. I've been at this 30 years, and I have probably another, I don't know how many years, to be done because it's there. It just needs to be spoken to. That's the message for younger artists. Could you give an example of one of your pieces and how it deals with ethnic identity and perception? I had long looked at representation of our peoples in museums, and they all dwelled in the past. They were one-sided. We were simply objects among bones, bones among objects, and then signed and sealed with a date. In that framework, you really couldn't talk about joy, intelligence, humor, or anything that I know makes up our people. So, I created the artifact piece. I became the Indian and lied in state as an exhibit along with my personal objects. That hit a nerve and spoke loud both in Indian country, the art world, and the frontier of anthropology. The installation took objects that were representation of a modern Indian. What happened to me? Collecting my memorabilia, such as my degree, my divorce papers, photos, record albums, cassettes, college mementos. It told a story about a man who was in college in the 60s, but this man happened to be Native, and that was the twist on it. What role do the audiences play? What I like about installations is that the audience participates. They walk around, they look, they become part of it. As the artist, you know how you can make them stop. You know when you can make them go to this corner because that's how you lay it out. I involve the audience. People give you control of their imagination. I can have them outraged one moment and crying the next. That's the power the audience gives you. It's knowing that and knowing how to use it effectively. I guess the statement is that I'm not up here to entertain, though I can be damn entertaining. I'm here to teach you. In one piece, you ask the audience to take a picture with you, a real Indian. The reaction is just as much a part of the artwork as what you're doing. That was one of the more ultimate audience participation pieces that I scripted. I was unaware of the impact it would have. That piece could have been a disaster if nobody wanted to be involved or they wanted to get up and sing and dance. But what it created was a conversation amongst the people in the room as to whether they should or not. What was going on in the present when you're asked to take a picture with a real Indian? What does that mean? It also was leading. There was an Indian in a breechcloth with everybody going, oh wow, there's an Indian. Then I came out in my street clothes and they said, oh, there's a guy. But when I came out in my regalia, I knew that it would get the response from the audience. everybody went for it. There was a big ooh and ah when I stepped up on that pedestal with my war dance outfit. They forgot about all the rest and really lined up to have their picture taken. This is the memento that they really wanted. Even people that were art savvy fell for it. Tell me about your latest work, Amendatio, which pays tribute to the 19th century Native American Pablo Tack. Tack took the perceptions of our culture from being looked at as spear chuckers to linguists. How many people knew that we had this person who trained in the ministry of the Catholic Church in Rome, who started to devise our own alphabet and stories from an Indian point of view? Today we're looking to recapture our language. That's a key to any culture, and it will make us stronger. That's one of the first things that we were denied, our language and our spirituality. It's something that I wish other people knew, that maybe would change people's attitudes about us. For our people, he's a really important figure. Here was, over 100 years ago, someone trying to learn English. Pablo Tack was absorbing this language because he could see the future for our people, which didn't look very good. One way to make the culture survive a little is to write it down. And I would add, to perform it. To make it live. A living culture. We're not set in stone. We didn't die out. We were killed out. We're here. We proclaim. And we claim.
In 1987, at the Museum of Man in San Diego, California, I premiered an installation performance, The Artifact Piece. That was to change my art career, establish my place in contemporary art history, and opened up mainstream art to other multicultural artists. This installation performance dramatically illustrated the lack of inclusion of contemporary Native cultures in American society. This artwork was cited as one of the important artworks produced in the 1990s and was included in the historic 1990 Decade Show in New York City.
So tonight's classic, just for you, you believe me, just for you, at the conclusion of tonight's program, on a little table outside, signed and dated, limited edition. A wet room catcher. Signed by me, yours truly, with a little prayer. featured here in Salina, Kansas, with a real Indian here tonight. Free. On the La Jolla Reservation, here, amongst my friends and my brothers, we like a good story. We like a good tune. We like sad music. God damn it! Let's dance for Dino! Hey. Miyuke. Miyuna. Haka. Haka. Man, a lot of people here. Well, my nephew, he invited me up here. I don't get out much, you know, and he said, you come up. You're a real guy, he said. I said, thank you, nephew. So come up and I want you to say a few words. What am I going to say? Hell, I know nothing. I'm just an Indian playing with Indians. That's what you say. Real guy. Well, I used to be a real guy. I used to be a hell of a man. Now I'm just a hell of a man. I am not Ishi. In my heart, I am Ishi. In my dreams, I am Ishi. In my nightmares, I am Ishi. In the blood that runs through my veins, there is Ishi. You come and look at me as though I'm a freak. I am a man. You lay your hands on me like you touch a dog. I am a man. You inspect me like I am a thing. I am a man. You measured my cock and weighed my balls. I am a man. You asked me to smile for you before that camera. I am a man. I am a man. There is no word in our language for goodbye. We know we will all see each other again in that other world when we leave this life. What we say is, you stay, I go.
I'd like to ask you all, if you're able, to stand for for a moment, just in joy and remembrance of our friend James Luna, and to wish him good journeys as he continues and continues. Yamagoa James, I would dance for you. Thank you. I don't know about you, but it gives me chills seeing him. He was a very, very special person. So let's get to the boring stuff. We should have done the other way around. And we could all gone out for a smoke and a drink and do it like that. We'll still do that, okay?
Yeah, I heard that.
So, I work at the Canada Council for the Arts. For those of you who are not familiar with what that is, that's this nation-state's public arts funder. So we're tasked with distributing money that the government gives us to artists, to organizations all over this land. It is by nature, as a federal crown agency, a colonial structure. So I've been considering what Indigenous presence means within these kinds of spaces, and a lot about how we all share these spaces. For me, the land we currently know as Canada is made up of two projects, the Colonial Project and the Indigenous Project. And they each have three phases. Pre-contact, held no people. We could talk a lot about those, but I think we probably know the Colonial Project because it's the one that's around us so much. You know that history because it's their history, the one they teach us at school. For the Indigenous Project, the pre-contact could be, I articulate it as cosmology. Cosmology in this sense embraces an Indigenous view of the universe and its attendant processes that incorporates language, culture, technology, land, spirituality, and histories encompassed in the distinct knowledge systems of the many nations that made up this place we now know as Canada. The phrase, all my relations, is often used to explain the interaction of all things within an evolving, ever-changing social, cultural, technological, aesthetic, political, and environmental intellectual framework. What I would refer to as the cosmological dynamic. Cosmological intellectual ecosystems exist as a form of knowledge transferal. They are epistemological environments where notions of nationhood are interspersed with and connected to and integrated with a larger sense of the plurality of life. The second phase, post-contact, the Colonial Project, settler colonialism. Settler colonialism and the rise of the myth of the nation-state. The rise of the Canadian national mythology is based on notions of Canadian plurality, trump the invocation of an Indigenous cultural specificity that in historical terms predates the national myth, and indeed often aggressively resists it, are then disreputed and placed at the whim of the search for a Canadian national identity. And I'll come back to that. Such is the challenge we face as we negotiate a space for constructive dialogue between settler colonial and Indigenous perspectives. Damien Skinner very rightly traces the historical roots of settler colonialism in Canada and contemporizes it as a relationship, and I quote, still predicated on the elimination of everything other than the settler, end quote. The strategies for that extermination are well known to us. Violence, exploitation, theft of land, cultural genocide, assimilation, appropriation, the Indian Act. Perhaps we need a White Canadians Act to legislate the lives of our settler citizens. Am I being facetious? Not entirely, for until settler Canadians truly understand the depth of the betrayal of the Canadian and previous British state in its relations with First Peoples, it is hard to imagine a true rapprochement. Can a settler art history that takes as its point of departure the need for a foundational change to that relationship be part of that movement? Perhaps so. But where then is our point of departure? For example, in 1949, the Massey Commission was officially appointed by Prime Minister Saint-Laurent. It issued its report in 1951. After investigating the state of arts and culture in Canada, the Commission advocated for the federal funding of a wide range of cultural activities and made a series of important recommendations, including the creation of the Canada Council for the Arts, the CBC, and others. The recommendations that were made by the Massey Report and enacted by the federal government are generally seen as the first major steps by the Canadian government to nurture, preserve, and promote Canadian culture. Little, however, was recommended in the way of promoting and preserving Indigenous arts and culture. Oh wait, there was one paragraph, and I'll read it to you. Since the death of true Indian arts is inevitable, Indians should not be encouraged to prolong the existence of arts which at best must be artificial and at worst are degenerate. The impact of the white man with his more advanced civilization and his infinitely superior techniques resulted in the gradual destruction of the Indian way of life. The Indian arts thus survive only as ghosts or shadows of a dead society. They can never, it is said, regain real form or substance. Indian art as such cannot be revived. The Indigenous Project Phase 2, contact phase, is manifested through resistance, resurgence, revival, reimagining the Indigenous, naming, claiming, proclaiming. The work of Indigenous artists takes the place of Indigenous cultural sovereignty and nationhood. It resides in a context clear of colonial assertion. By situating themselves in colonial spaces, they claim them. But this is the point. By not responding to the space, but invoking an epistemological and discursive imperative within it, the artists involved take responsibility and ownership of it. An ownership that resides in their rights, physical, conceptual, intellectual, and cosmological, through a priori knowledge systems based not on Western ideas of territory, but on Indigenous epistemological frameworks. There is no contemporary, no traditional. There is only we are. The result is powerful, humorous, at times contentious, even contemptuous, angry, proud, profound, and illuminating. They posit a unique new landscape, not predicated on Western foundational thought, but rooted in our own worldviews. These theories do not supersede or repudiate those of Western thought, and that's important, but can be seen as distinct and in many ways complementary to other discourses, not just. But the differences are important, and they point to a fundamentally dichotomous view of Indigenous thought and association with that of Western thought. For Indigenous people, the cultural landscape becomes just that, a landscape replete with life and spirit, inclusive of beings, thought, prophecy, and the underlying connectedness of all things. A space that mirrors, memorializes, and points to the structure of Indigenous thought. The works all speak from their own particular and political narratives, but the strength of their presence as decolonizing narrative comes from its cogency as interlocutor and roadmap of assertive control, a control encompassed in the assertion of political and cultural rights, nationhood, and sovereignty. Phase 3, the future possible. For the colonial project, that future possible is reconciliation. Reconciliation is not about us. It is for the settlers. And that will come by taking responsibility and the abrogation of power. A lot of people have been talking about reconciliation lately, and I think that's a good thing. The work of the TRC and its calls to action are a profound roadmap forward. But Ronaldo Walcott writes that reconciliation suggests a post-action. It suggests that some wrongdoing has been done for which the possibility of forgiveness is an act of coming together again. Reconciliation suggests a significant rupture of some kind has occurred. European colonial expansion from the 15th century onwards produced a rupture in the Americas, which in part produced the settler colonial nation state of Canada, which also produced new states for being Indigenous peoples and belatedly African peoples. Those kind of collective meanings, Indigenous, African, Indian, Asian, and even European, are the cataloging evidence of the historical rupture for which European man comes to overrepresent itself as if it was indeed man. I think we can all agree with Ronaldo's articulation of the rupture that has brought us here. Where I would like to diverge slightly, and only specifically as it relates to art histories, is to suggest that any new relationship that we are embarking on together become a journey of conciliation. For me, conciliation in this context differs from reconciliation in that it does not assume a previous coming together has actually taken place. Conciliative behavior among settler and Indigenous art historians together means then creating new conceptions of art and art histories. The plural becomes very important at this point, that explore cultural expression and continuance. By doing so, we forego notions of authority and official national narratives that underpin Canadian society's understanding of itself. It fundamentalizes Indigenous histories, worldviews, and struggles for sovereignty within an ever-changing and dynamic plural society coming to grips with a troubling past and a challenging future. Societies, civilizations, thrive when there exist systems of thought, pedagogy, and cultural continuity that are woven into the lived experience, communal and collective, of all its peoples. White settlers who seek solidarity with Indigenous challenges to settler colonialism must confront how white supremacy shapes settler colonialism, our solidarity, and our lives. Phase 3 of the Indigenous project, Future Possible, is this conciliation. And it comes through cultural sovereignty, free, prior, and informed consent, and true power sharing. Indigenous curators, theorists, scholars, and artists are working to create a body of critical discourse that articulates a specific Indigenous art history. Settlers seeking to be part of this struggle must create pathways of inquiry based on notions of decoloniality. This kind of work seeks to widen the space for critical discussions of art and culture, while also highlighting Indigenous artists and cultural producers' role in defining an Indigenous social, political, and cultural presence distinct from, yet also intrinsic to, the contemporary realities of a plural contemporary state. Arbiters within this discourse must understand and be truly cognizant of Indigenous perspective on the making and presentation of Indigenous artistic production, one that will take into account differing forms, aesthetic processes, cultural symbologies, and histories. They must balance Indigenous cultural and political histories with contemporary artistic and curatorial practice and treat Indigenous artistic production as an act of proprietary self-definition and cultural self-determination. The production, exhibition, and dissemination of art is fundamentally about the transmission of knowledge. At its worst, this is a one-way transaction based on the notion of validity. At its best, it can be a collaborative search for meaning. It is this search for meaning that can link us. But for settler scholars, curators, critics, theorists, and artists, it is vital to understand the underlying dynamics of Indigenous resistance to colonial notions of superiority, so rooted in Canadian institutional structures and systems. Kahande Horn-Miller reminds us that, quote, as Indigenous peoples, we have found it necessary both to react to and to differentiate ourselves from the beliefs, values, and practices that have been imposed upon us through colonization. To make our resistance effective, we sometimes use the tools of the dominant society. Like Audre Lorde's famous quote that the masters of tools can never be used to take down the masters of. I love that. This does, however, imply a differing contextual environment in which the work of Indigenous artists must be viewed. We know, for example, that language as cultural signifier evolves and changes, constantly redefining a culture's existence. Likewise, creative production by Indigenous artists not to task. Now, what I can say is we've been in this process for the last few years at the Canada Council. We've taken these thoughts and we've tried to actualize them, to make pragmatic ways to address some of those issues. And the largest manifestation of that is the programs that I run. It used to be that all the Aboriginal programs were embedded in disciplinary sections. Yeah, we had little pockets of money for Indians, but they were still within the box of the colonial, especially the Euro-Western part historical canon. So we have to break that. So we have to understand this idea of the plurality of art history and aesthetic practices. And for us, aesthetic practices that include not traditional art, historical art. That is our art history. It's sitting in a lot of museums and on a lot of people's shelves. They're sold. That is our art history. So how do we unbind ourselves from that? What we decided was that we had to create a space that was an indigenous space. Yes, we acknowledge colonial as colonial gets. How do you create that space there? Well, about 20 some odd years ago now, 1997, Canada Council started on that path. It was post-OCA, post Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples report, and post something that had a profound effect on me, which is Alanisa Balswan's film, Kanisatake, 170 Years of Resistance, which is one of the most profound historical documents ever produced on this land. It was those things were happening. We watched OCA take place on TV most of our state. It was all we could do. Some of us got there, but most of us watched it on TV. It was heartbreaking. It was absolutely disgusting. But there was something liberating in it as well. It was a small group of Mohawk warriors, men, women, children, who stood up to the colonial government and said, enough, no further. It was a profound moment. It was early in my career. I was just starting to think about art. I have to think about it in new ways. Alanisa Balswan, James Luna, Robert Gould. They were who we were looking for, because it was the artists who showed us the way. Showed us there was a way. We didn't have to die, although still many of us do. Tina Fontaine, Bushy, like that. But is there a different path? Maybe. From this, we start to think, we start to imagine, we start to claim, proclaim. We demand space. We demand it. What the Canada Council did that 21 years ago that was profound was that they agreed, that they instituted the Aboriginal programs. But what was even more important, that came out of that huge conference with 350 of us. I'd never seen so many Indian artists in my life. I don't think I've ever seen that many Indians in my place, to be honest, except on the res. They started hiring Aboriginal people. That started a long process of going to Indigenous space. A few years ago, we started to think about this. How can we change this colonial system? Let's take this to the next step. So we, in creating Knowing and Sharing, CKS we call it, we abandoned the Massey Report as a foundational document. We use the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the final report of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and the report of the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples. Still as vital a document now as it was 21 years ago. Over 400 recommendations. None taken, shelved. But these are our foundational documents. We also think about who is it that we are serving. This idea of a professional artist based in Euro-Western Canada has to be abandoned. We don't use it. emphasize knowledge transfer. Because that's how we keep our cultures alive. Those people are teaching the language. Those people are reciting the stories. They will keep our communities, our nations, and our peoples alive. So have we decolonized the Canada Council for the Arts? No, I'm not going to lie to you. But we have created a space, and it's resourced, because that money is ours. It comes from our land. It comes from our resources. This is part of reparation. Okay? That's how we see it. We need to feed our communities. We need to feed our cultural carriers. We need to feed our artists. We need to feed our organizations. Because only in that way will they be able to continue what they're doing, which is showing us the way to conciliation, the future possible. I get the lucky job of handing out the checks. They get the much more difficult job of being, knowing, creating, sharing. And that's, I hope, what the Canada Council for the Arts can help the people that share this land come together and really start on a journey that takes us to conciliation and true respect, true reciprocity, and a true future for all of us.